In here about the fall of Babylon, which, as we now know, is the fall of Rome. And so we begin in chapter 18, verses 1 through 3. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, I won't shout, I'll just read. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a home for demons and a haunt for every evil spirit, a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries.
Not this again. Or the adultery with a beast or whatever. Enough.
This is known as a doom song. And there are multiple examples of doom songs in the Old Testament that were directed at Babylon or at Ashkelon or at Tyre or who knows how many different places during the course of history. But you can find real good examples of doom songs in Isaiah, in Jeremiah, in Zephaniah, in the Old Testament. Some of those doom songs very closely parallel what John has written right here. That's no surprise to us, right? Because he does that a lot. Now the angel charged with the message of doom comes with the very light of God upon him. Remember, it says that he came to the earth and illuminated the whole earth. This is also a concept from the Old Testament, that anyone coming from the presence of God shines with the light of God. And there are a number of examples in the Old Testament of this too.
Moses.
Yeah, Moses and...
Yes. The shining face, the illumination of Jesus and the transfiguration.
Without your son, God will show you.
Yeah, that's right. John is so certain of the doom of Rome, he writes this doom song as if it has already happened. Did you notice that? It sounds like it's something that happened in the past. He's just so positive this is going to happen. I wonder how certain could we be of the doom of America? You think our nation is slowly going downhill?
Sure feels like it.
Yep.
Economically, morally, spiritually, you know.
I would disagree with you on one point.
Yes.
The slowly.
Oh, yes.
It's all those Republicans.
Than you think. And so the Babylon falls, the demons haunt the ruins, the pagan gods who are now banished from their reign haunt the ruins of the temples where their power had once been supreme, but now there's nothing but ruin and disaster. Chapter 18, verses 4 through 5. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, John heard a lot of voices.
I think he was
I
a
think
bit
John had
tested
a lot of wine.
Well, now don't laugh, because our next whole series of lessons is I hear voices. So, I mean, you know, we all hear voices.
Well, I hope it's
let's
more
admit it.
readable and easy to understand.
We do.
than
We
this.
all hear voices from time to time.
Is this firsthand, Brian? This lesson?
Sure it is. Sure it is. You hear the voice of your parents once in a while, your mother. You hear the voice of friends, or the voice possibly even of a preacher or a Sunday school teacher saying something sometime. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she is given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Mix her double a portion from her own cup. Well, the Christians, first of all, are encouraged to get out of Rome before the big day of destruction occurs, for fear that the Christians are sharing in the sinfulness of what's going on all around, for fear that the Christians are going to end up sharing in the doom that that's coming. See, throughout, and this is an Old Testament thing too, throughout the Old Testament, God repeatedly calls upon people to cut their connections with sin, with sinful peoples, with idolatry, and to come out. I mean, the biggest and best example of all is to come out of Egypt and stand with God in the Exodus. But it was true with Abraham from Babylon, it was true from Lot coming out of Sodom. I mean, there's all kinds of examples of this. And so John is saying, you know, he hears this voice saying, come out of Rome, cut your connection with this sinful, terrible place before its corruption drags you down with it. And these cries and challenges to come out really describe another thing, and that's the essential apartness of Christianity from the rest of the world when you think about it. Paul said it in Romans 12:2, we are not conformed to the world, but transformed from it. In other words, we are to live differently than the world, but within the world. Okay? Verses 6 through 8. Let's keep going here, on a roll. Give her as much torture, mix her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torture and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit as queen. I am not a widow, and I will never mourn. Therefore in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her.
Now, how does this reconcile itself with the teachings of Jesus?
It does not.
Right.
And that's a major
I thought
point.
maybe I had missed something.
No, this is a major point to consider
Uh-huh.
right here. This is all about punishment now. And at first it does sound like the instructions being given to the Christians are to exact vengeance. You know,
That's what I was thinking.
Go out and burn the place down, do whatever you got to do. But, first of all, recognize the fact that this is an instruction that is being given to the angel, not to the Christians per se. The angel who is the divine instrument of justice. Because after all, vengeance belongs to God, not to us,
All right.
poor souls. Now it is true, a true thing, that a person reaps what they sow. That the measure you give is the measure you will get. At least we hope that's true. What we say today, what goes around comes around. I believe that. I think eventually, sooner or later, it does. Even if it doesn't come around as fast as you hope it does.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. There are other things in the Bible about, you know, it rains on the rich as well as the wicked, and
Yeah,
so
I'm not sure about, I don't know about that either.
or if it's coming around, it may not be then in this lifetime.
Well, that's how I feel. A lot of times I think when you say that, it's kind of flippant, like,
Yeah.
you know, and you're hoping bad against someone, actually. And I don't
Yeah,
know
well,
that
you may
that's,
be getting away with it now, you dirty bugger.
Yeah,
What goes
right.
around comes around, and you'll get yours.
Yeah.
And I'll be standing on the sidelines laughing when it happens.
see, I don't
you
think
know.
that, but we all will be judged eventually, but not by
Not by
karma.
each other.
By
That's right.
God, we'll all be judged.
Now, there's something else you need to recognize here, I'm sure, Dave, that you'll recognize this once it's brought to your attention. The idea of being repaid double is a very Jewish idea, because Jewish law specified that anyone who is responsible for loss or damage to property, for example, they had to repay it twice over. Double payment. And so, this isn't meant to sound as much like vicious revenge as he's quoting Jewish tradition, Jewish law, to repay in double. Well, anyway, it's a simple law of life. Punishment follows sin, one way or the other, right? We can at least agree on that. Pride is to be humiliated. Rome's supreme sin, pride and arrogance. Nothing arouses condemnation more than that, because arrogance feels that it has absolutely no reason to need God. Now,
Or presumes they have that,
or presumed.
that approval and affection. Yeah, they're pretty self-righteous.
The rest of chapter 18 goes like this. Verse 11 begins with a dirge for Rome. Then there is, through verses 9 and 10, a lament by the 10 kings for the demise of Rome. Then follows verses 17 through 19, a lament by the merchants who have done business with Rome. And then follows in verses 11 through, that was 11 through 16, verses 17 through 19, a lament by the shipmasters and sailors. Excuse me. You know, we hear all of this from John about wanton luxury, corruption, all the things that John says. You know, how much is John really exaggerating? I mean, you know, how far overboard has he gone to do this? I'm going to take a few minutes to read to you some things, and then you can decide for yourself whether John was being accurate or whether he was being, you know, exaggerating.
He was living, when he wrote that, he was living under centurion occupation, right?
That's correct.
So the view there is pretty dim.
Well, I'm going to take, this is kind of long, but I think it's important to read all this because if I can find it. Okay. In the first century, the world was pouring its riches into the lap of Rome. The Pa Romana, the long peace, the safety of the seas, the freedom of trade, had made Rome the entrepot for the peculiar products and delicacies of every land from the British Channel to the Ganges. The historian Pliny talks of a meal in which one dish was entirely of India, the second of Egypt, the third of Cyrene, the fourth of Crete, and so on. Course after course after course, each one from the unique foods of foreign lands. Thank you, my dear.
You're welcome.
My God, I could swallow the cup itself. Juvenal speaks of the seas peopled with great keels and of greed luring ships on expeditions to every land. Aristides has a purple passage on the way in which things flowed into Rome. Merchandise is brought from every land and sea, everything that every season begets, and every country produces the products of rivers and lakes, the arts of the Greeks and the barbarians, so that if anyone were to wish to see all these things, he would either have to visit the whole inhabited world to see them, or go to Rome. So many great ships arrive from all over the world at every hour, at every season, that Rome is like some common factory of the world. For you may see such great cargoes from the Indies, or if you wish from the blessed Arabias, that you might well conjecture that the trees there have been stripped naked. Clothing from Babylon, ornaments from the barbarian lands. Everything flows to Rome. Merchandise, cargoes, the products of the land, the emptying of the mines, the product of every art there is and has been, everything that is begotten and everything that grows. If there's anything you cannot see in Rome, then it is a thing which does not exist and never did exist.
Wow.
The
Sounds
money,
like Las Vegas.
the money possessed and the money spent was colossal. One of Nero's freedmen could regard a man with a fortune of 652,000 pounds sterling as a pauper. Apicius squandered a fortune of 1,000,000 pounds in refined debauchery and committed suicide when he had only 100,000 pounds left because he could not live on such a pittance. In one day, Caligula squandered the revenues of 3 entire provinces, amounting to 100,000 pounds, and in a single year, scattered broadcast in prodigal profusion 20 million pounds. 20 million pounds sterling was a lot of money back in the first century.
Still is.
Oh, yes.
44,000 plus another half.
Nero declared that the only use of money was to squander it, and in a very few years he squandered 18 million pounds. At one banquet, the Egyptian roses on the banquet table cost 35,000 pounds. Let the Roman historian Suetonius describe his emperors, and remember, this is not a Christian preacher, but a pagan historian, okay? Of Caligula he writes, in reckless extravagance he outdid the prodigals of all times, in ingenuity, inventing a new sort of baths and unnatural varieties of food and feasts. For he would bathe in hot or cold perfumed oils, drink pearls of great price dissolved in vinegar, and set before his guests loaves and meats of gold. He even built galleys whose sterns were studded with pearls. Of Nero, Suetonius tells us that he compelled people to set before him banquets costing 20,000 pounds. He never wore the same garment twice. He played at dice for 2,000 pounds a point. He finished with a golden net drawn by cords woven of purple and scarlet threads. It is said that he never made a journey with less than 1,000 carriages, and all of his mules were shod with silver. Drinking pearls dissolved in vinegar was a common ostentation. Cleopatra is said to have dissolved and drank a pearl worth 80,000 pounds. Valerius Maximus at a feast set a pearl to drink before every guest.
What was it supposed to do if you drank a pearl? Bring you
dissolve
luck?
it, and then you drink it.
But what is
The
it?
point is that you're so rich you can drink an $80,000 pearl.
I wonder if they tasted, if they had any,
Well, they
I have
said
no
vinegar,
idea.
so I doubt that it did, but.
Horace tells
They're similar to a
of
gold
swallowing the
fish.
pearl from Metalli's earring dissolved in wine, that he might be able to say that he had swallowed 1,000,000 sesterces at a gulp. Just to brag about it.
Well, I don't know how they do this stuff, with like an earring would dissolve.
It was an age of
Yeah.
extraordinary gluttony. Dishes of peacock's brains, nightingale's tongues were set before the guests at banquets.
ew.
Attilius,
And
who
everything
was
else
emperor
was
for
wine.
less than a year, succeeded in spending 7 million pounds mainly on food in less than a year. Suetonius tells of his favorite dish. In this he mingled the livers of pike, the brains of pheasants and peacocks, the tongues of flamingos, and the milk of lampreys, brought by his captains from the whole empire, from Parthia to the Spanish Strait. Petronius describes the scenes at Trimalchio's banquet. One course represented the 12 signs of the zodiac. Another dish was a large boar with baskets of sweetmeats hanging from its tusks. A huge bearded hunter pierced its side with a hunting knife, and forthwith from the wound there issued a flight of thrushes, which were dexterously then captured in nets as they flew about the room. Towards the end of the meal, the guests were startled by strange sounds in the ceiling and a quaking of the whole apartment. As they raised their eyes, the ceiling suddenly opened, and a great circular tray descended with a figure of Priapus bearing all sorts of fruits and bonbons.
Makes you hungry.
Yeah, it does.
I
I've
don't
seen
think
pheasant,
so.
pheasant brain.
I still have some more to read,
I
and
can't wait.
I apologize for taking so long, but
Oh,
it's
this
really
is
important
interesting, yeah.
to understand that John wasn't really exaggerating what he was saying. This Rome was so cruel. Well, we've all heard of Roman orgies, you know, that kind of stuff. But the details of this is just fascinating. At the time during which John was writing, there was in Rome a passion for silver dishes. Silver came mainly from Carthagena in Spain, where 40,000 men toiled in the silver mines. dishes, bowls, jugs, fruit baskets, statuettes. Whole dinner services were made of solid silver. Lucius Crassus had wrought silver dishes which had cost 50 pounds for each pound of silver in them. Even a fighting general like Pompeius Paulinus carried with him on his campaigns wrought silver dishes weighing 12,000 pounds. The greater part of which fell into the hands of the Germans, spoils of war. Pliny tells us that women would bathe only in silver baths. Soldiers had swords with silver hilts and scabbards with silver chains. Even poor women had silver anklets, and the very slaves had silver mirrors. At the Saturnalia, the festival which fell at the same time as the Christian Christmas, and at which gifts were given, often the gifts were little silver spoons and the like, and the wealthier the giver, the more ostentation was the gift. Rome was literally a city of silver. Bear with me, I'm getting there. It was an age which passionately loved precious stones and pearls. It was largely through the conquests of Alexander the Great that precious stones came to the West. Pliny said that the fascination of a gem was that the majestic might of nature presented itself in a limited space in that gemstone. The order of preference in stones: diamonds first, emeralds second, mainly from Scythia, and then beryls and opals, which were used for women's ornaments, and third, sardonyx, which was used for seal rings and so forth. One of the strangest of ancient beliefs was that precious stones had medicinal qualities. And I won't go through all of that, but they all supposed to have had
Tell me
cures.
someone ate a diamond.
Of all stones, the Romans loved pearls more than any other, and as we have seen, they were drunk, dissolved in wine. A certain Struma Nonius had a ring with an opal in it as big as a filbert, worth 21,000 pounds. But that pales in insignificance compared with the pearl which Julius Caesar gave Servilia, which cost 65,000 pounds. Pliny tells of seeing Lolia Paulina, one of Caligula's wives, at a betrothal feast, wearing an ornament of emeralds and pearls covering her head, hair, ears, neck, and fingers, worth 425,000 pounds.
Was the author of that book a Brit?
Beg your pardon?
Was he a Brit who wrote that book?
Yes.
Barclay?
Well, he's Scotsman.
Scottish, so that's
Yes.
why we're using pounds.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't think John is, you just have to understand the opulence, the luxury, the corruptness, the moral decay, the debauchery of what Rome was like in those days. And you can begin to understand why someone with moral character, like John, is ranting and carrying on the way he is. Okay, in chapter 18, verse 11 through 16, we have the lament of the merchants. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because they love Rome? No, because no one is left to buy their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. Cargoes of cinnamon and spice, incense and myrrh, frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, and wheat, cattle, and sheep, horses, and carriages, and bodies and souls of men. Oh, I've still got to go. And they will say, the fruit you long for is gone from you. All your riches and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. And they will weep and mourn and cry out, woe, 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 great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. And you can see what the merchant's lament is. John is expanding by saying the economy of the world is going to go to hell in a handbasket. That's what's going to happen. The merchant's lament is obviously purely selfishness. There's no love for Rome in their demise. because they could care less about that, only the loss of wealth, and they don't offer to help in any way. And then there is a lament by the kings. I missed that somehow. In verses 9 and 10, when the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxuries see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, and they will stand far off and cry, woe, 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 great city! O Babylon, city of power, in 1 hour your doom has come. Oh, woe is us. And then third, there's the lament of the sailors and the people from the sea. In 1 hour such great wealth has been brought to ruin, and every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off when they see the smoke of her burning, and they will exclaim, how was there ever a city like this great city? They will throw dust on their heads and with weeping and mourning cry out, woe, 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 great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Oh, everybody is
Woeing and
woeing and lamenting because Rome is gone, which means the wealth and luxury and decadence is no more.
The bubble has burst.
The bubble has burst big time. And then all of a sudden, there comes from all this woeing and lamenting and so forth, this verse. Rejoice over her, O heaven. Rejoice, saints and apostles and prophets. God has judged her for the way she treated you.
Revenge.
rejoice.
How long, over what period of time would you think the degradation occurred? From
When it actually occurred or when John thought it would occur? I think
Well,
John,
Barclay probably had a comment on it. Historically,
All Rome
was it
4th
20
century.
years or 30 years, you know, for all of this? I mean, these riches had to go somewhere. Somebody had to
Right.
plunder them and take them off.
well, of course, the grandeur, I guess you could call it, was Rome. Eventually, it rots away and disappears.
People take the stuff with them when they.
But John was wrong about one thing. He said the city would be no more. There would never be any trace left of it. Well, of course, Rome is still a big city today. But I think John was expecting this to happen very soon. I mean, after all, the early church was expecting the second coming very soon.
Very soon.
And
Yeah,
so,
that's
you know, I don't think he thought in terms of decades or centuries. I think he thought this punishment for this terrible sinfulness was going to, the wrath of God was going to come very soon.
One event and it's over.
Right, well, yeah.
It says 1 hour in there.
Through all the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls of wrath and the 7 angels of vengeance and all this kind of stuff, it was going to happen. And I think he expected it to happen maybe even in his lifetime. Because
the what are now Germans, the Visigoths and that, they sacked Rome. And I can't remember the year now, but it was
I think it was like 400
It
and
took a while.
something around
They
there.
had so much stuff they had to take.
yeah,
I mean, that's kind of where my head is. But it did
if you're going to
take 10
plunder
years?
Rome, you better have a lot of wagons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here we are, have those who are celebrating over the destruction of Rome, those who are happy to see God's vengeance meted out to their persecutors. You know, again, something that Dave brought up a little while ago, this is a long way from praying for those who despitefully use us, right? This is really, on the other hand, though, the voice of faith, too. The faith being that no one on God's side would ultimately end up on the losing side. Right? That if you had the faith to be on God's side, you would not be involved in the punishment on the other side. And also, there's a little bit of personal bitterness present, I think, in this. If you
a little.
a little bit. I mean, those who are to be destroyed are the enemies of God. Not to be looked on so much as the personal enemies of individual persons, okay, but the enemies of God. by saying that they are my own personal enemy, then you personalize it too much. But the enemies of God are to be punished. But on the other hand, this does seem to be a long way from the teachings of Jesus to love your enemies. But far be it from us to judge people at John's time what they were going through. How would we react and feel and think if we were going through the same horrors? Verse 21 through 24, I'm bound and determined to finish 18 here today, so we can get on to 19 next week. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea, and said, with such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music of harpists and musicians and flute players and trumpeters will never be heard again. No workman of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's great men. By your magic spell all the nations were led astray. In her was found the blood of prophets and of the saints and of all who have been killed on the earth. John's picture of destruction and devastation is complete. Nothing will remain. No more music, no crafts, no domestic activity, no light, no rejoicing. Rome becomes a terrible, silent, black, dead desolation. And the punishment is well deserved. Why? Because Rome worshipped wealth, luxury, and materialism. Think about this, folks. Rome led other peoples and nations astray with her sorceries and charms of wealth. Rome flirted with the evil powers of the world, aligned itself with evil, and Rome was blood guilty, killing the martyrs. I hope that's not a description of America, but it kind of sounds like it, doesn't it? After all, there are a lot of people in the world who call us the great Satan. That was what John called Rome, the great evil Antichrist Satan. Okay, next week we go into chapter 19. There's only 3 chapters left, or 4 chapters left, 3 of which we're going to do, 1 of which you're going to do. And I will start next week by giving you a brief overview of those 4 chapters, and then we will jump in and continue on.